Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Steve and Amanda Pettit, who are the directors at Rescue Hill Compassion Ministry in Arlington, Texas, that focuses on human trafficking and combating that evil in our world. And there's a lot of evil in our world, but there's hope through Jesus. So let's get into the conversation with Steve and Amanda. Steve and Amanda, thank you for taking time to be on our podcast today to share about your journey and how Jesus has used you throughout your life. So thank you for being here today. As we begin, could you share with us your calls to ministry and kind of your ministry journey that Jesus has taken you on?
Sure. Steve, do you want me to start?
No, I can.
Okay, go for it.
We are from Medford, Oregon, is where we were living at the time. God called us into full-time ministry, and Amanda and I had been serving in our home church there at Medford First at the time. That was the name. And we had a Bible study in our home and just really involved in our church and just doing different things as laymen. And actually, it was back in 2009, March of 2009, I went on a mission trip to Honduras. And on that trip, had a very real encounter with the Holy Spirit, just met with Jesus there in a way I'd never really met with him before. And it was a very clear call to just basically sell everything we own and become lifelong missionaries for him. And I came home and shared this with my family, my wife and my 3 little kids. And, hey, God's called us to close our business and sell our homes and, be missionaries. And like, whoa, okay, let's go. And they had not had the same experience that I had at the time, but God in his mercy and grace gave Amanda her own personal call just within a week or so of that. And our kids were just excited to come on board. And we shared that with our church family, with our pastor and some of our mentors there. And they came alongside us. We ended up, they said first thing we should do is try to lead one of our own mission trips. So we did. We co-led a trip to El Salvador and worked with a missionary there named Milton Gay. And then about 6 months later, we led as the main leaders another mission trip with our church to Guatemala. And while we were in Guatemala, the same missionary, Milton, was there, and he invited us. He said, "You've got a clear call in your lives, and I'd love for you to come partner with me here in the work we're doing in El Salvador." And so the original call in Honduras was March 8th of 2009, and we were gone in under a year and a half of that. We had literally closed down our successful concrete construction company. We sold our home and a couple of rentals we picked up and sold everything and moved to El Salvador as volunteer missionaries, totally self-funded, crazy missionaries. And that was the call, March of 2009. And, we're not overseas at the time now. We served in El Salvador. We served in Haiti for a couple of years. We served in Dominica, which is an island in the Caribbean for 2 years. We did that all through Church of the Nazarene as Nazarene missionaries. But now we're in the States, and Amanda will talk more into that. But the way we see it, we're missionaries everywhere we go. Even our email is Pettit5. It was Pettit Family. And we just have been very clear that our kids are missionaries along with us. We're a missionary family. It's not just mom and dad, the missionaries, and their children. It's a family of 5 missionaries. And that's how we've always tried to live it. So
when your husband comes home from a mission trip and says, "Hey, God called, and we're going to sell everything we own and pack up our 3 children and move to the mission field," when you are someone like me who didn't get saved till I was 15 years old. And so I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't understand that. So I didn't even have a concept of what missionaries were. And so God is just so faithful. And when I told him, well, okay, let's pray about that. God is just so faithful and softened my heart towards it. And like he said, you know, I had my own call, but it didn't happen until we had gone back to, he had been to Honduras. We went to El Salvador together. And I just really clearly remember we were out praying. We had built a small church, and the team was out, and we were all laying hands all over the community and praying. And there was this little boy that kept beckoning me to follow him. And so I was following him, and I remember like the smell of sewage and broken down cars and things like that, and trying to think in my mind what my life there would look like. And he just kept like beckoning me and calling me forward. And as I was just praying and kind of following to see where he was leading me, it was like in that moment, God was so clear that I will lead you. I will take care of you. And you can say yes to this. And so Steve and I kept to ourselves. We said, okay, let's pray about this. And then actually when we led the team back to Guatemala, we had not told our family, especially the grandma, or our 3 kids. And anybody listening to the podcast that knows Milton Gay will completely understand. Milton is a missionary that's very hard to say no to. And so we were on Skype with our kids and the grandma, because she had him when we were in Guatemala. And we said, let us introduce you to Milton. And Milton gets up there and he says, my friends, are you ready to move to El Salvador? And that is how the news was broken. And our kids had no concept. They were little. They're like, El Salvador, let's go. Woohoo! And the look on her face was never, ever the same. But she's been our #1 supporter. And actually, even at 81 now, goes wherever we go. So whatever country we've been to, wherever state we live, the Nana comes. So.
And I'll also add, Jeff, that she was on the trip to Honduras. She was on that team, and she saw firsthand the life-altering encounter I had with Jesus. I mean, I was Christian and loved the Lord and was serving him, but the personal encounter I had on a little dirt road in Puerto Cortez, Honduras on March 8th of 2009 changed my life forever. And she observed it from a distance. She saw it. So it's kind of cool, you know. So there was no, you know, are you sure? There was none of that. It was like, man, I saw what I saw. You guys belong there. So, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And thank you for sharing the story and just how God called both of you and your family and your kids to this ministry. And one of the things that we recognize that when God calls us, that God has created us with gifts and passions to be used for him, regardless of where we are. What are some of the gifts and passions that you have that inspire your ministry?
You know, I would always say that I think growing up, for me personally, I grew up in poverty. I grew up in family violence. I grew up with domestic violence. I grew up with a lot of just different abuse. And I guess I never realized that it was actually abuse. It was just part of my childhood. But I have always seen people in the margins. And it's like God has taken all of that and he redeemed it and he made it beautiful and put in me these giftings and this ability to see those that are on the edges, to see those that are not served, to see those that don't necessarily fit inside church walls. And it's been, you know, 22 years, I think, that I have faithfully served the church and Church of the Nazarene, that I've learned how now to welcome them into who Steve and I are as people and into our family and then into the church. Like I would say that Steve and I are bridge builders everywhere we go. I think we always laughed when we were assigned to a particular field because we're always the only missionaries assigned to the field. And either nobody likes us or there was like conflict that needed to be, and bridges that needed to be built. And so God used all of that through all of the years in just being very, very relational, as well as seeing those that are lacking and those that aren't served, as well as now we see that happening here at Rescue Hill, that we are the only Nazarene Compassionate Ministry Center in the USA Canada region that's doing any kind of work in trafficking. And so again, I feel like we're kind of those, I wouldn't say that we're lone rangers because we love to take people along with us, but definitely pioneers of pioneering work, as well as just being bridge builders of like, hey, this is what we found over here. We want to bring you along with us.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Me? Oh yeah, I agree. Of course. Yeah.
Is there, you want to add to that, Steve?
I'm nodding, and the podcast people can't see that. Sorry. Yeah, I agree totally with Amanda. We are bridge builders. It's what I love about the Lord is, you know, He gives us our gifts and our talents and our strengths, and you know, He gives us our passions, our desires. You know, that I preached on this. Well, I added it into a word that I taught just a week or two ago. You know, God gives us the desires of our heart. But I think, you know, without going deep theologically into that verse, I think in God's goodness, you can word that either way. He gives us the desires of our heart, meaning He gives me a desire to please Him. He gives me a desire to serve Him. God gives me the desire to better my community, better my world, better my friend group. And then He gives me the desires. God, I want that, or I want to serve you better, or I want to hunger and thirst more for your righteousness. And then He grants me that. The word is filled with promises. You know, if you hunger and thirst for me, I will give you more. You know, if you lack wisdom, you should ask. I mean, there's so many promises in the word. So anyway, I think that God in His goodness gives us these desires, and He uses our gifts and our experiences. Like Amanda shared her childhood, you know, growing up the way she did, and being around addiction and being around brokenness and all those things. And her and I dated clear back in high school. I mean, I think she was like 15 when we started dating in high school. And so, you know, God is able to use those things, her experiences, both pre and post salvation story, to use those today. So I think that's really good how the Lord does that.
Well, as you both have mentioned, Rescue Hill is where you currently are. Can you tell us a little bit about Rescue Hill? Maybe, can you tell us the story of Rescue Hill?
Sure. Rescue Hill actually has a quite the legacy. It started as the Baraka home for erring and wayward girls in the early 1900s, where a couple came from Waco, Texas, and we're located in Arlington. Did I freeze? Can you guys hear me?
No, we hear you.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
good.
It started in Waco, Texas, and this couple came to Arlington, Texas, where we are located, and they were pioneering work. They were working with women who they referred to as erring and wayward, which we now refer to as trafficked. And they had a heart and a vision for a home that women would come in and be transformed by the love of Christ. And they would teach them basic skills like what we now call economic empowerment. They would teach them how to make handkerchiefs, or they worked in the printing press. They believed in keeping moms and babies together. And so they would teach them how to be good moms in that as well. And you know, Steve and I had served in El Salvador, Haiti, and Dominica, and we'd come back here to the U.S. You know, we went to a church. We were volunteer staff members. We were trying to restart a 20-year-old compassionate ministry that the church had, and it just never came to be. And in that time, I had started volunteering with trafficking with an organization here in Fort Worth, and started learning about what it was and realizing that everywhere we had been, I had seen it. So I had seen human trafficking, which is forced fraud or coercion for either sex trafficking or labor trafficking, means exploitation. Someone selling another human for personal gain, for sex or labor. And I realized that what I had seen in El Salvador but didn't have language for is what I was seeing here in America. I realized what I saw day in, day out in Haiti, mostly in children, and didn't have a language for it, yet it's like I had this compass that would lead me to it, and I just saw it. And then as I was able to identify it in Haiti and move on to Dominica and be able to verbalize what it is, see it, and then I felt helpless to do anything about it. And so when we got back here and we were on staff at a church, and it felt like we were plowing concrete is what it felt like. I started to volunteer. I started to get involved in my community. And, of course, Steve was so supportive in me going inside the inner city schools and talking about sex trafficking, and me making him drive down certain roads and all of this stuff as I was really discovering all of it. And we actually had an offer to go back on the mission field. And it was to pioneer the work of the church. And I will tell you, there's not a missionary that doesn't want to pioneer the work of the church. Like, it is just innately in us. Like, God puts that in us. And so we were considering it. Like, we were praying about it. And I remember sitting in our backyard and asking the Lord, what do you want me to do? And I'm expecting an answer of like, yes, go back on the field. And instead he said, I want you to open a shelter for trafficking victims. And I was like, hold up. Like, I don't know how to do that, God. And he said, you don't have to know how to do it. I know how to do it. And so I went to Steve and shared this, and he's like, okay, like kind of a reversal of what happened in Honduras with him, then with me. And he's like, we'll pray about it. If God said, let's do this. And so we approached our district superintendent and shared like this vision with him. And most DSs are going to say, that's a huge liability. Absolutely not. And instead he said, let's pray about it. And a week later he said, hey, I think I have a building for you. And we checked the building out. It's an old Nazarene church building from the 70s that needed to be repaired. And we met with the church board, and they said, hey, we'll give you the building as long as you take us with you. And we have done that. We brought them in along. And then COVID. And so literally we had a work and witness team come, and the first day the work and witness team came was when COVID hit the news. And it was that next Sunday, all the churches were shut down. And so during COVID, Steve and I just plugged along in the building, him and I, painting, mostly him, let's be honest.
Mostly him.
I'm a great supervisor. And so we started putting all of this together. We started building a shelter for human trafficking victims. I started connecting with other organizations. I started getting certifications and training and doing anything that I could do to educate myself. And then we got a call, and we had our first victim come and do the emergency beds with us. And I learned a ton. And then the next one came, and I learned a ton. And it's been God's faithfulness of just teaching us, yes, we're trauma informed. Yes, we're educated. We're all of these things. But really what it comes down to is it's just the love of Jesus through us. And we don't ask any of the women like what they believe when they come in our doors. We just know that obviously it's that prevenient grace, it's that sneaky grace happening, that God's already working in their lives if they're walking into our building. And we've had women come in saying they hate God for what happened to them. and they're leaving 48 hours later praising God that they have a new place to go. So that's kind of how the emergency beds were born. And then we very quickly realized we can't just have emergency beds without advocacy. And so we do like emergent short-term advocacy, but we also do long-term advocacy. Yeah, so we do that emergent short-term advocacy. So for example, I got a call from another part of our state. We used to work with local law enforcement. Now we only work with Arlington PD, and we actually work on a federal level now. So we are a partner on the Homeland Security North Texas Trafficking Task Force. We are literally a partner organization. And so I'll get a call from wherever. I'm able to kind of navigate the situation from there and then refer out. So that's kind of our short-term advocacy. But as well as that long haul love is we are with them for life. And so oftentimes at Rescue Hill, we're the first organization that they have worked with, and I will either send them into long-term placement. Sometimes they're actively in the life, and that's what we call it when they are actively trafficked or being prostituted, and they'll stay in the life, but we literally walk with them through that and give them opportunity to step out along the way. So that's kind of our long-term advocacy. We just had our first one, and I can talk about her because she transitioned completely out of our services. She came in, did emergency beds. We sent her to a long-term restoration home. She graduated and now is actually part of our church. And so that has always been our vision and our goal of our women. And so it's really fun to see them go off and then return to us. So with that advocacy, we always say that Rescue Hill we're gap fillers, which we don't want to recreate what other people have done. That's why we have emergency beds. There really are not a whole lot of them outside of homeless shelters, which have their place, but they're not best place for a trafficking victim. And then we are actually starting a stabilization home. So we're opening a home, much like JT Upchurch and Maggie May did in the early 1900s, where we're going to allow the women to keep their children with them. We're going to start with under the age of 4, just because that, JT and Maggie May Church didn't have to navigate all the liabilities that we do in 2022. And so we're going to start there, but that opens in January. So we're going to go from like the emergent care, the emergency, undercover operations, 48-hour beds, into stabilization, which could be anywhere from 90 days to 12 months with them.
And when did Rescue Hill open?
We got the keys in November of 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, it was our first. That's when we got the keys, and we started renovating. January 1, we really started renovating the building, and into March, we had that first team Amanda mentioned was in March, and then COVID hit that same month of March of 2020.
Yeah, so this type of ministry would be probably a huge learning curve in the best circumstances, but when you throw a global pandemic in as you're trying to launch it, there was, I'm sure, a lot of, everyone was going through the difficulties of what to do with COVID and how to handle it, but starting something and pioneering something, as you guys mentioned, that's an incredible journey. I'm sure that probably caused some sleepless nights and among other things as you were trying to start that. So you recently had a person that has essentially graduated out of your program. Is that what you indicated, Amanda?
Yeah, we've actually had a few in just the short time that Rescue Hill has been open. We have grown exponentially, and so the 5-year goals that we set of like, okay, let's be at this point in 5 years, we actually hit at a 2-year mark. And again, a lot of sleepless nights, just like we just see God's favor on what we do. But yes, we've been in it long enough that we're now seeing the clients that we worked with in the very beginning transition out of our services. Yet when we talk about like that long haul advocacy, we're also about long haul love. And so they stay a part of us. They just take on a different role. So we've had a few graduate now, and then actually one's about to graduate in December, and we offered her a job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So one thing that comes to mind is, as you mentioned, you walk with someone who is remaining in that situation, whatever that may be. And I'm sure there's heartache that you experience along the way where for whatever reason, the person is not able to get out of that situation.
Yeah.
And has no blame. That's not my point here. But that creates an emotional toll, I'm sure. And part of what I want to ask you is, in our society, even when we're just talking about ministry that's not trauma type ministry,
Yeah.
there's people that come into our lives, whether it's our neighbors, whether it's co-workers, that we have them for a season, and we can only influence them as long as Jesus allows us to influence them.
Yeah.
So do you have any words of encouragement for people to be faithful with the season that Jesus gives you with those that he gives you?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure Steve will have something to say about this too, but I would say two things come to mind. You don't do it alone. And oftentimes we think that as people that are ministering, that it all depends on us. And the reality is it doesn't. It depends on God, and he's faithful. And I think that it's that, especially in like the field in which we're in, we have to make decisions very quickly. Like you don't always have the time to be like, everybody's like, oh, pray about it. And we're like, absolutely, Jesus, help me. Here we go. Like, Jesus, take the wheel. We're going. And yet remembering and taking pauses of like, God is with us. We don't do this alone. And then the other thing, this may sound really weird, but a woman with another organization, phenomenal organization, been in it much longer than I have, super wise, said to me, stay at a place of compassion and not empathy. And what she means by that is, when we're compassionate, we feel for the person. When we're empathetic, we put feet to the compassion. And oftentimes we can become enmeshed in the situation. And so I know that I have to stay at a place of compassion, really to guard my heart. Because if I took home every story, the church would probably revolt if they knew some of the conversations that were happening here. But it's just the reality of the work that we do. If I took all those home, I myself would be a mess. And so putting pauses throughout the day of like, okay, Lord, you're responsible for this. But also I use my drive time. So if I'm driving from one place to another, I don't talk on the phone. I don't try to work. Now my husband thinks that he's the best multitasker when he drives, makes me crazy. I try to find those pauses in my day where I just listen to good music, or I choose what I want for lunch. Like, that sounds ridiculous, but it's those little things that like keep us moving forward. And also having really healthy community around you, that there are people in your lives that you don't feel like you're ministering to them, you're just in a relationship with them. And that really has become our church that we planted.
Yeah.
You have something to add about your bad multitasking?
I'm the best multitasker. Jeff, we planted a church out of our ministry. So Rescue Hill is its own 501c3. Rescue Hill, technically Nazarene Compassionate Ministry Center. And then out of that, we planted Rescue Hill International, or RHI. which is a church. And we're a Saturday night church because, like Amanda said, when we got the building, there was a small Spanish church meeting here on Sundays, and the building was just too much for them and their size. And so we took basically the whole building, but let them keep Sunday mornings and access and use the building as they need, the use facility. And then there's a Sunday afternoon Burmese refugee church that we let use the building. They're a Nazarene church. They're amazing people. And so it's that's happening on Sunday. So Saturday nights, we have our church that we meet 6 o'clock Saturday nights. We meet 5:15 for prayer and then 6 for service. And, we opened it. We decided, if we're going to have an anti-human trafficking organization and the population we're going to be ministering to, we need a place for these women usually to find hope, find peace, find community outside of the organization that happens upstairs. So we planted this church, and Amanda and I are both ministers or ordained. And so we said, man, let's do this. And so we did. And we just have this small community group. And we find, sometimes some of our clients will come here and they make this their church home. Other times they'll come for a short season, 3-4 weeks, and then they're gone for 6 months, and then they'll pop back up, and it's just kind of this in and out. But the point is for us is to remain, to be steady, to always be here. The door's always open. Some of the verbiage we use isn't just some catchy tagline. It is literally our DNA. We talk a lot about the table. There's a space at the table for you. Every other Tuesday night we have a community, not community. It's our church comes together for a meal, and we have prayer, and we just spend a lot of time praying and eating here. It's what we do, and but we make one big table, instead of multiple tables. We put all our tables together to make a square or a triangle or whatever. They're always touching one table. We do a lot of casting that DNA and that culture, creating a culture of inclusion. Nobody on the margins. Everybody, there's a place for you. We just aim at that, and not everyone receives it. Like I said, sometimes you'll get someone that'll come and they'll be here and then they're gone and then they come back. But for the most part, we're a family. We're a community here that everybody's helping us shoulder this load. Even though upstairs is the anti-trafficking area, downstairs is more the church and my office, and some in our fellowship hall and that. But our church, our community, RHI is helping us shoulder the load that happens upstairs. So,
yeah. Well, and that's how it should be, right? The church is not just to exist to keep its own lights on.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, so that sounds like a partnership that exemplifies what Jesus calls us as a church to be.
Yeah.
Now I will link to like your website and any social media you have in the show notes on the episode. So anyone who wants more information about Rescue Hill, that they can go there, and they can even give online.
Yeah.
Are there ways, I guess giving is one of them, but are there ways that if someone wants to get involved, that they can do that with Rescue Hill?
Yeah, absolutely. One of our biggest ways is, especially for people that are further away, is becoming part of our prayer team. And we always have great intentions. Like, we've tried to be very strategic in creating like overall prayer teams, and then those people that are vetted and like background check. If I'm going out on a call or whatever, I'll just send out a text, hey, heading out a call, need prayer, so people can plug in those ways as well. And then I think one of the absolute biggest ways is to be educated, to sit through one of our trafficking 101s, or pay attention to the things that we're putting on social media, etc. And so that you can look for it in your own community, and find ways that, like, if you see it, what do you do? Like, we teach all of those things. Just educating yourself and knowing what to look for and knowing what resources are available, that you're making an impact in your own community as well. So those are probably, if you're not in our area, those are the two biggest ways to be involved.
And do people have access to your Trafficking 101 videos?
Yeah, if you our great intention is, again, when I say like the years we've been open, we've grown exponentially. And so we have all these plans, and our executive administrator who keeps Steve and I moving in all the right ways is out on maternity leave. And so slightly dying without her. I need her desperately in my life. But we put it out on social media. We have opportunities that people can jump on and get on a Zoom and hear what we're doing. But then again, for churches, if you're like, hey, we want to do a Trafficking 101, we just schedule a time and jump on Zoom or Skype or whatever, and I do a 101 with you.
And part of why I asked that is trafficking is, I'm in Iowa right now, and it's not as though trafficking doesn't exist here, right? Sometimes it's only third world countries or on the borders.
Yeah.
It's much more prevalent than what we even want to imagine that it is. And so it's something that no matter where you are, there is a need for that.
Absolutely. It's a supply and demand. And so if there's a demand for sex anywhere, there's going to be a supply for it.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for your time. And I like to end with an open-ended question. If there's anything that you felt we didn't discuss that you want to share, or just something that you just felt is worth sharing with our listeners today.
I don't. I mean, usually what I'll share is to be educated, especially for the church. I mean, the church gets a bad rap out there in fields like we're in because people say church doesn't want to educate themselves. Church says, no, you do it this way. But I would encourage everybody to learn what trafficking is, how to identify it, how to stop it, to call. That's how you're going to make a real impact in your community.
Yeah.
Steven, you have something?
Yeah, I would. I agree with Amanda, and I would say identify what your local anti-trafficking orgs are, who they are, what they look like, how you can partner with them. If you don't have one, go to your next community, go to your neighboring city. But you can Google, I'm sure, anti-trafficking orgs near me, and it'll pop something up. And I mean, we're all in. We call this the fight. We're in the fight together. And scripturally, the church is called to be in the fight. We're called to not just pray. That's our number one thing, is pray. But we're called to put feet to it and get out there. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, it's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, Jeff. It really is.
Well, thank you for sharing today. Thank you for pioneering this ministry, and I mean, even just briefly educating us a little bit about the need for this. And I hope it inspires people to educate themselves further about how we can put feet to this need and do that. And as I said, I'll link to your website and any social media you have, so people can connect with you further if they would like. But thank you for being here and for being guests on our podcast. Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.